chapter 1.10, part 5. So we're going to get into critical race theory. The main example we're going to look at is 1.10.10, Micheline Thomas, Le déjeuner sur l'herbe, les trois femmes noires, from 2010. So we're going to look at this interpretation that critically examines society and culture as it intersects with race, power, and institutional practices. And I'll get back to that in just a minute. And then it also can reflect the intentions of the artist, right? The perspective, where they're coming from. And then sometimes it's really within criticism or the viewer or all three. So sometimes, and this has happened, I can think of, recently, it's escaping me, but sometimes someone will put out a piece that's commenting on racism, and then somebody thought it was too dark. The viewer might have thought it didn't read the way the artist intended, and there was some critical repercussions to that. Same thing with criticism. Okay, so this piece, if it looks familiar in terms of the layout, I'm going to skip ahead, and you looked at this probably already in your book, page 181, and then there's an inset for page 503. So if we look over here, again, we have our friend Manet, who is an iconoclast himself, and he's breaking up tradition by putting clothed men with a naked woman. He's breaking up some things here. He's got this sort of triangle of figures, and then we have, with Thomas' piece here, we have the same setup in terms of the way they're sitting, and then the background gets much more abstracted. There is sort of a tree here collaged in, and some greenery. We could interpret it as very similar. So I'm going to back up again to the larger picture. So instead of putting women in the background, as we did in our previous example from Manet, and also just over many, many years of women taking a subordinate role in art, and then also African American women, or African Americans at all, not even showing up in a lot of the artwork. We did have that again with Manet. He did break that up with The Servant, but that's a subordinate role, and here we have three women in the foreground. So it's quite powerful, and he's shifting the history, or the take on this, by taking a historical example and reinterpreting it in a modern way, in a race critical way, and also a feminist way. There's also some iconography in here. If you look on page 182, it starts to talk about the Marimekko patterns, these patterns on the women's dresses. So that's kind of giving us a sense. This artist paid in this in 2010. This artist was raised in the 70s. So that is what women who were going to be powerful and gorgeous and well-dressed, that's what they were going to be wearing. And also the hairstyles, of course, and the jewelry and so on. But that's where he's bringing back... in our book on page 182, it says the fashions in New Jersey, where Thomas grew up in the 70s, featured animal prints, faux fur, Marimekko fabric, and wood grain. So that was the idea, to show some of the personal take on this history, on this shift in this painting, but meanwhile also changing the context and questioning our visual cultural history. So borrowing and updates, right? But non-traditional materials. Oh, that was the other part. So there's also some rhinestones or some other things that were sort of less fine art, less seriously taken, which has changed as well. But at the time, this was, quite bold and out there. Okay, so psychological analysis, and I know many of you kind of do this already with artwork, and yes, that's always kind of true, but sometimes more than others. Put it that way. It was kind of vague. But here we see a tormented soul, really frustrated, really scared, and to the point where everything has gotten sort of stylized and simplified. They say when you're really under deep stress, which some of you are probably experiencing that on and off, that you get tunnel vision. You can't see very well, and details become um, sort of fuzzy, if that makes sense. But there's a couple things we want to look at here. One of which is Edvard Munch. That's our person here. He's Norwegian, very famous, 1893. He claims that this is a representation of kind of what he saw and how he experienced it, not so much visually, but emotionally. So that's a way to paint a painting. That's a way to express something. And he is sort of the godfather of the expressionists. He's not calling himself that at this time. They come a little bit later. The expressionists, and then we get into the abstract expressionists, which is even farther later. But there was a group of German expressionists. He's Norwegian, it's not far away, but that came after him, and he sort of came up with this style initially. But you see there's some anchors in realism. Like this fence railing is almost, realistically rendered up here, and there's like a little, a bit of a shadow there and so on. But he felt overwhelmed when he saw some people on this pier or bridge. He got completely freaked out. Now the sky is actually quite possibly realistic. When Krakatoa exploded 10 years prior to that, 1883, in Java, down on the southern hemisphere, not far from Australia. So much volcanic matter was put into the air, it changed the weather patterns, and it changed the look of the sunsets for many years. So this is 10 years later. It might have been painted a little bit earlier. We don't know. So he's feeling completely freaked out. We know this. He witnessed this incredibly intense dust storm, and he also may have had an attack. The book is saying of agoraphobia, fear of open spaces, but it doesn't depict what he saw. It depicts what he felt. It's a psychological piece. So he was disturbed. This piece was actually done a number of times and stolen. I think more than once. Okay. Based on an actual event. Okay, Las Meninas, Velázquez. Oh, so amazing. So we're going to look at a combined analysis in historical and contemporary art. So this is going to be form and content, so you get the sense of the difference here. And I will read from the book a little bit here. I'm struggling concentrating a little bit. It's March 18th, 2020, and I'm sorry about that. I'm just really having a hard time. Okay, so we want to think about our implied lines from the frames on the right wall. So we have some lines going on here. We have a lot of verticals there. We have this diagonal. It's almost a vertical, but it's kind of cutting off, and it's bringing our attention here. And then we have contrast back here, very bright light against dark figure. Let's see, what else do we have? We have some triangulation going on. The head of the figure here to the mirror to this person, we have that triangle going on. And then we have a longer triangle going on from Velázquez, that's the artist himself painting the painting, to the small child here, Las Meninas, and then over here to the dwarf, which was part of her court. So there's some triangulation going on. She's like a little triangle herself. So those are things that we notice our eye goes to. Repetition of squares, neutral tones, right? What are neutral tones? They are grays and browns. And then if you mix in black and white and brown into different colors, you get more of a neutral color, even though it might have been a bright color in this context with this lighting. It might be a little bit darker. So this is his choice that he is choosing to make it a little bit darker. So the painting is balanced in various ways. I'm going to read from the book here, page 184, bottom right paragraph. All the figures are placed in the lighter bottom half of the canvas. If you look at how the window's open here where that light source is, so the figures are in this lighter bottom half. So it's cut off this way. And balanced by the sparseness of the wall and darker ceiling that take up the top half. So this is our darker top half up here. Okay? while the figures at first appear to be arranged chaotically, they are actually placed in several stable pyramidal arrangements. So we're looking at that. One triangle hits three of the composition's focal points: the mirror, Margarita, and the man in the doorway. So we have our mirror, Margarita. She's our main focal point, and the man in the doorway. So secondary focal point because of that high contrast of the black and white. That always catches our attention, and it's meant to. So part of well, I don't want to skip ahead too much, but we are looking at all these things. We're very conscious of the way that he set up all these different elements, and principles to work to get our attention. He does this on purpose, and we'll discover that in just a moment. Also, there's red, a little bit of red there, red there, red there, red there. So it jumps around. So if red can bring your eye around, that's always helpful because we notice red, and I think I talked about that in color theory. It's blood or fire, so our eye will go to red, and then that is an artist's device to get us to look at something. Okay, so we'll get out of formal analysis. So we're talking about, and this is what you're asked to do on your assignment. You tear it apart in terms of the lines and the shapes and the colors, right? This is a shape here. We repeat a lot of squares and rectangles throughout this piece. We get into more organic shapes with the figures down here, right? Curvatures. Look at this lovely curve here. Lovely curve there, curve there, curve there. So those are organic shapes. So that's our formal analysis. Now I'm going to wrap up on that. We're going to get into our contextual analysis. And we want to understand the content of the work by understanding the time in which it's made. So now we're on to the meaning of this painting. The young girl is the Spanish princess Margarita Habsburg. The couple in the mirror are her parents. So they're out of view. Supposedly they're over here, and the girls are looking at the royal couple off stage here, if you will, or out of the painting. But they're here, and she is to inherit the throne. Her parents are King Philip IV of Spain and Mariana of Austria. So the Habsburg Empire, just so you know, that was huge. It was very important with the Austrians, Hungarians, Austro-Hungarian Empire, part of Germany too, and then marriage with the King of Spain. That's very important because that's more land, pulling that all together and making a larger land mass. The mysterious man in the doorway, and this is page 184 again, is Nieto, the Queen's Chamberlain. Velázquez uses the mirror and his portrayal of an essential aid to the Queen subtly to indicate the presence of the royal couple without violating etiquette, which did not permit the showing of the King and Queen in a portrait with lesser court members. Okay, so they're sort of included here without being present. Now, if he were to have painted them, they would have just included Mariana, perhaps, or maybe one other person, the dog, perhaps, or, any of the actual blood-related children, or, somebody significant in the family lineage. The artist, Diego Velázquez, here would not be included, the Chamberlain would not be included, the dwarf, and so on. So anybody who was not a direct, and this may be the nurse here, a direct lineage would not be portrayed with the royal couple. So biographical analysis, this is kind of him placing himself a bit in the place with the king and showing his closeness because he wanted to become, and I'm skipping ahead to iconographic analysis here, because he wants to wear the cross of the Order of Santiago here. And this was actually painted on, sorry, my mouse is not going. This was actually painted on not by Diego Velázquez, but later after he died, when he actually did get in the order. He did not really have a right to claim to become in the order. He wasn't nobility. He had Moorish, which means Muslim, blood, and he also was considered a craftsman as opposed to someone of higher status. So in Spain at this time, 1656, an artist is considered a craftsman with not a lot of intellectual ability. So part of his idea with all this formal analysis and trickery of putting the royal couple in and setting up this interesting composition was to show that he knew about elements and principles, he knew about math, he knew about mathematics. So he wanted to kind of throw that in to sell the point that he wanted to become a part of the Order of Santiago. So he is not yet one at the time of this painting. He becomes one a little bit after, but he campaigns for decades to get inside the order. Okay, so this is a lot of content, a lot of meaning. There's more even than what I meant, than I showed you, but we had contextual analysis, which meant who the people are. We had biographical analysis, which is talking about Velasquez's story and how he wanted to become part of this order, and the iconography, which is the cross itself here. Trying to think of anything else I'm thinking of. So that's another part of it, okay? So there's more meaning even than we touched on, but that is a good start for the breakdown.